Russia is pushing for Pokrovsk. It has been for about a year, with the summer in particular seeing Vladimir Putin dedicate around 110,000 soldiers to the task. Putin assumed that Russia would have taken Pokrovsk by now. Instead, the city still stands, though some argue it is on the brink, and Putin is dealing with a major problem. Pokrovsk has become a bloodbath for the Russian military. October may have been the worst month of all for Russia. In a month from hell, Russia has suffered the colossal loss of 25,000 troops, and it's all thanks to the clever strategies Ukraine has been using to defend Pokrovsk. That's according to United 24 Media, which reported on November 7th that Ukraine has confirmed the deaths of 25,000 Russian soldiers during October alone. Bear in mind that this is deaths, not casualties. A casualty can mean anything from death to injury to capture. This is 25,000 Russian soldiers who have been permanently eliminated from the conflict and who will never be able to recover and terrorize Ukraine again. 25,000 deaths is a huge number. So huge, United 24 Media says that it's the highest monthly toll Ukraine has taken on Russia's forces since Putin launched his supposed special military operation in February 2022. The figure was revealed by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky during a meeting with journalists on November 7th, where he revealed that Russia's constant push for Pokrovsk accounts for the majority of the recorded deaths. In recent days alone, Russia has launched 220 assaults on the beleaguered city, many of which use heavy equipment that is vulnerable to Ukraine's drones. Russia's forces, though massive in number, are making themselves easy targets. There are two more interesting nuggets of information that have emerged from Zelensky's claims. The first is one that we've already mentioned. All 25,000 of the Russian deaths have supposedly been confirmed on video. This hints at part of the strategy that Ukraine has used to achieve such a massive kill count. If the deaths are coming from footage, then something has to be shooting that footage. Ukraine's first-person view, or FPV, drones are one of the few weapons that fit the bill. Those drones record footage in real time and deliver it straight back to their operators, allowing Ukraine to collect data that has likely led to the number that Zelensky quotes. The second nugget is something that Zelensky mentioned in an almost offhand manner when reporting the 25,000 deaths. The real number might be higher. United 24 Media reports Ukraine's president as claiming. Zelensky says that Russia likely suffered an additional 2,000 to 3,000 casualties that weren't captured on camera. These deaths were likely the result of artillery strikes and direct ground battles, not involving drones. Assuming this estimate is accurate, that means Ukraine killed up to 28,000 Russian soldiers in October, which amounts to around 903 deaths per day. That is a huge rate of attrition, and it doesn't bode well for Russia's ongoing war effort. Add these latest figures to the overall total of Russian casualties for the Ukraine war, and a very grim picture of Putin's approach to the fight emerges. According to the Minfin site, Russia has suffered a little over 1.15 million casualties between when Putin launched his invasion and November 9th. As we mentioned earlier, this number includes all Russian soldiers who have been killed, wounded, or captured fighting against Ukraine. However, there's an interesting trend that has emerged in recent months that may go some way toward explaining why October 2025 saw Ukraine record its largest ever single-month kill count. As Politico reported on October 13th, Russia's ratio of dead to wounded is horrific. The outlet quotes the Ukrainian organization I Want to Live, which is an intelligence hotline Ukraine created to offer Russian soldiers ways to safely surrender from the fighting. Due to the lack of a normal system of evacuating the wounded from the battlefield, there are only 1.3 wounded soldiers per 1 dead. This signals a low level of survival of the wounded, who are poorly trained in tactical medicine and are usually abandoned without help after injury. I Want to Live reports. That ratio is doing Russia no favors. Neither is what appears to be Russia's policy of leaving its wounded to fend for themselves rather than evacuating them to receive medical treatment. So many Russian soldiers are dying of injuries that might otherwise not have killed them because Russia isn't doing enough to evacuate those who need it. The result is what we see in October. More Russians have died in a single month of fighting than ever before. Of course, Russia's own callousness is far from the only reason that the October death count is so high. There are several others, starting with the sheer brutality of the Pokrovsk front, where the majority of these deaths occurred. United 24 Media makes this point in its report on the Russian death figures, noting both the volume of assaults that we mentioned earlier and the scale of the fighting occurring both inside and on the outskirts of the vital Ukrainian city. Pokrovsk, which is located in the Donetsk Oblast and is seen as a vital logistical hub that some have called the gateway to Donetsk because of its importance, has become the epicenter for a raging battle. That battle incorporates drones, artillery, and heavy armor, all of which Russia is using to attempt breakthroughs into the city. These heavy assaults aren't the only Russian tactic that has contributed to its high death count. The country is also sending in small units of soldiers, dubbed infiltration groups by the Kyiv Independent, into the city. These groups do one thing very well. They force Ukraine to hunt them down, which prevents the formation of a defined defensive line. However, the units are so small that they stand no chance of survival once they're located. So, death on such a massive scale seems to be part of the Russian strategy. The country's infiltration groups are succeeding in pulling Ukraine's defensive line all over the place, though those infiltrators are essentially on suicide missions that allow the heavy units behind them to launch more concerted assaults. It's a brutal strategy, a meat grinder of Putin's making, into which he feeds any soldier he thinks is capable of holding a gun. And if the soldier can't even hold a gun, they can at least absorb Ukrainian bullets. So there are fewer left over for those Russian troops that can be useful in an assault. This is no exaggeration. On September 19th, The Telegraph offered some insight into the callous nature of Putin's offensive against Pokrovsk. It reported that Russia had formed units of seriously ill soldiers that it was sending into battle, with many of these sick soldiers being pushed to the Pokrovsk combat lines. These soldiers, the outlet reports Ukraine as claiming, often have serious conditions such as HIV or hepatitis, and they're being sent into battle wearing special armbands that mark them out as being sick. Dmytro Zhmylo, who is the executive director of the Ukrainian Security and Cooperation Center think tank, explains, there is currently information that these units are participating in fighting in what is currently the hottest spot, Pokrovsk. According to The Telegraph, Russia's so-called infected units are becoming more common as a result of a host of diseases breaking out on the front. It reports one instance of an entire Russian unit being afflicted with a hemorrhagic fever that leads to those who catch it bleeding from the eyes. For any civilized military, these types of conditions would be grounds for an immediate medical evacuation of all of the affected troops. HIV is also running rampant among Russia's troops. The number of soldiers carrying the autoimmune disease has skyrocketed 20 times higher than it was in 2023. The Telegraph reports. For Putin and his bloodthirsty desire to capture Pokrovsk, these diseases represent an opportunity. Two opportunities, in fact. Zhmylo explains one of them, noting that Russia is using a twisted version of germ warfare to inflict psychological damage on Ukraine's defenders. The presence of sick Russians on the battlefield can exert a certain moral and psychological pressure due to close contact with such an enemy, and also forces the Ukrainian military to be more cautious and take care of their health and safety. The think tank leader says, this feeds nicely into the second opportunity Putin has identified, which is that Russia's sick soldiers are a great asset for eating away at Ukraine's resources in Pokrovsk. Beyond the need for more stringent medical procedures, sick soldiers aren't much use in a fight. They're slow, lack energy, and are more likely to die in combat. That's all part of Putin's plan. As we said before, Russia's use of its own soldiers as cannon fodder is part of the reason why so many of its soldiers have been killed in Pokrovsk. The infected units are likely among those that are being sent to infiltrate Pokrovsk or otherwise do battle on the front lines, with each soldier in those units that dies being an acceptable casualty to Putin. After all, the Russian president's thinking may go, these were people that were going to die anyway. So why not have them die soaking up some of Ukraine's ammunition? It's twisted, it's brutal, and it's part of the reason that so many Russian soldiers are dying. Putin's callous brutality aside, Ukraine has more than played its part in inflicting such a massive death toll on Russia's forces in October. 25,000 dead Russian troops don't happen by accident, and it seems to be Ukraine's drones that are doing the majority of the damage. That's according to Pravda, which carries the exact quote that Zelensky made when revealing the scale of Russia's deaths. "We have 25,000 enemy losses, dead Russian occupiers, in October alone thanks to UAVs. This is an exact number because all of it has video confirmation. We have a program that awards additional points for verified actions, so the figure is precise." Thanks to UAVs is the key part to take away from this quote. And it confirms something that we suggested earlier in the video. Ukraine's drone-based strategy in Pokrovsk is tearing through the Russian assaults, and it's being aided by a strange form of gamification that offers Ukraine's defenders incentives to kill as many Russian soldiers as possible. The Guardian reported on this latest Ukrainian innovation on November 3rd, stating that the system makes drone warfare feel almost like a computer game. It's named the Army of Drones bonus system, and it sees Ukraine soldiers being awarded with points for every confirmed kill or injury they inflict. FPV drones make all of this possible with the real-time footage they shoot of the battlefield. Though it's possible that Ukraine is also deploying reconnaissance drones to tally up the numbers. Every participant in the game receives points that they can spend in an online store, through which they can buy other drones and autonomous vehicles. The number of Russian casualties in September is double the number from last October, in part because the Kyiv government doubled the rewards for killing Russian infantry, from 6 to 12 points, reflecting changing battlefield priorities, The Guardian reports. And we'd received a hint of just how effective this gamified system could be at motivating Ukraine's forces to kill as many Russian soldiers with drones as they possibly could. By September, 400 Ukrainian drone units were taking part in the new system and had recorded 18,000 Russian casualties between them. October smashed that record by at least 7,000. It's likely more, given that the September figures were for casualties, whereas Zelensky claims that the October figures are deaths only. Ukraine's drone-heavy strategy has become vital, Politico reported in August. At the time, it noted that drones were responsible for between 60 and 70% killed or wounded soldiers in the Ukraine war. The percentage now seems to be a lot higher. Based on Zelensky's figures, 25,000 Russian soldiers were killed by drones in the Pokrovsk defense in October, with up to 3,000 more dying by other means. That total of roughly 28,000 tells us that only 10% of Russia's soldiers died from artillery and other weapons that weren't able to record what was going on. A staggering 90% of Russia's October dead in Pokrovsk fell victim to drones, showcasing how vital these unmanned vehicles have become to Ukraine's defense of the city. Ukraine's increasing reliance on drones is a huge part of its Pokrovsk strategy. Every possible route into the city is under surveillance by Ukraine's unmanned aerial vehicles, which makes assaults far more difficult from the Russian perspective. It's not impossible to circumvent these drones. Russia's infiltration unit strategy is one of the ways that its soldiers manage to avoid them. But any vehicles or large gatherings of troops near Pokrovsk are almost guaranteed to have drones trained on them, making large-scale mechanized advances devastating to Russia, even if they're successful. There is a clear recognition of how vital drones have become in Ukraine. On November 7th, Zelensky announced that Ukraine is appointing a new commander for its drone air defenses. Yuri Cherevashenko will take the role, with his work on developing the interceptor drones Ukraine now uses to take out Russian Shahed drones, likely playing a key part in his hiring. Granted, this new division may not focus much on Pokrovsk, where Ukraine is on the drone offensive. However, it's possible that the new commander could come up with ways to counteract Russia's own FPV drones, which would make Ukraine's drones more effective. Combine Russia's brutal approach to its Pokrovsk forces with Ukraine's drones, and you get a recipe for a Russian manpower catastrophe. A catastrophe that has cost Russia a record-breaking number of soldiers in a single month. However, there may be another underappreciated facet that has contributed to what Ukraine achieved in October. On October 14th, military commentator Wes O'Donnell published an article on Medium where he asked an interesting question. Has the Russian military improved at all? The simple answer seems to be, not really. Sure, Russia has equipped its military with better electronic warfare equipment, along with drones that are either bought from Iran or inspired by Ukraine. However, the amilitary culture inside Russia is still as damaging to the nation's military now as it was when Putin rose to power. No shared after-action reports, no honest debrief culture, no habit of admitting errors. If a battalion drives into a minefield at dawn, the next battalion is jogging past the same marker stones at lunch, O'Donnell writes of the Russian military. When knowledge is hoarded, you pay in blood to rediscover what your comrade learned yesterday. Translate this to Pokrovsk, and you can see the problem. Russia's forces often go into battle unprepared for what awaits them because knowledge is hoarded. O'Donnell says that the country butchers the fundamentals. When Putin is sending ill-equipped, and in some cases outright ill soldiers into the Pokrovsk meat grinder, this information hoarding culture could be as big a killer as Ukraine's drones. It could lead to Russian units not knowing that drones and artillery are trained on their desired entry point into Pokrovsk, until they happen upon the remains of a unit that already tried to penetrate in that direction. By then, it's too late. The kill count would rise higher, with 25,000 of its soldiers confirmed dead in a month, almost all of them in the Pokrovsk direction. The question has to be asked, what comes next for Russia? Russia may start to have a hard time replenishing such massive losses, for one thing. Back on October 6th, David Axe reported that Russia had lost around 100,000 soldiers in its push for Pokrovsk. About a month later, we can add around 25,000 confirmed losses to that list, along with up to 3,000 unconfirmed. This is a bloodbath that is tearing through Russia's military. Axe said the same thing on October 15th, suggesting that Russia may now be at the point where it's losing up to 20,000 more soldiers per month than it is able to recruit. The soldier surplus helped to sustain Russia's war effort in Ukraine. But now, Russian field armies are running a soldier deficit. It's the inevitable result of the Kremlin's decision to double down on the already costly offensive around the fortress city of Pokrovsk in eastern Ukraine's Donetsk Oblast. Axe suggests Russia is trying to come up with solutions to these problems. As the Atlantic Council reported on October 16th, Putin is looking abroad to account for the massive losses that the Pokrovsk offensive has forced on Russia. The Council notes that even a mercenary from India has been captured in Ukraine, suggesting that Putin will take fighters from any country as long as they're willing to accept Russia's money to die for his cause. Soldiers from the Middle East, Africa, and East Asia are reportedly making their way into the Russian military. often as mercenaries who see the Ukraine war as a way to make a lot of money quickly. Many of these recruits are told they'll serve in non-combat roles when they're being hired, only to find themselves on the front lines. Still, even with these foreign soldiers, Russia's death rate may finally be catching up to it. Does that mean Pokrovsk is safe? Not by a long shot. Despite the number of losses Russia has experienced in its push for the city, Putin shows no sign of relenting. And if a November 8 CNN report is to be believed, Russia is poised to capture the vital Donetsk city, even though it is losing so many thousands of its soldiers. Fighting has intensified in Pokrovsk after Russian soldiers infiltrated the city, the outlet reports, and Russia is also claiming to have encircled their target. If Russia is successful, the fall of Pokrovsk would represent the biggest victory it has achieved against Ukraine since 2023. It seems that Russia's manpower-heavy approach might be about to win the day, as one Ukrainian soldier who is part of the Ukrainian Peaky Blinders drone unit tells CNN. The intensity of their movements is so great that Ukrainian drone operators simply cannot keep up with the pace, the soldier says. The Russians often move in groups of 3, counting on the fact that 2 will be destroyed, but 1 will still reach the city and gain a foothold there. About 100 such groups can pass through in a day. We mentioned earlier that Russia's small infiltration groups are a large part of the reason why it's losing so many soldiers. A 2-to-1 death ratio for each group of 3 is evidence of that fact. But still, the Russian approach appears to be working. Bit by bit, Pokrovsk is being penetrated. At least, that's according to some reports. One interesting thing to note is that Russia's infiltration strategy means that it has only managed to get 314 confirmed soldiers into Pokrovsk. That's hardly enough to launch a city-breaking offensive, especially with Ukraine's death-dealing drones on patrol. The total enemy grouping is much larger than that, United 24 media reports, though that grouping seems unable to break down Pokrovsk. Yet, how long the city will hold out depends on how true the reports of encirclement really are. Either way, we can expect a lot more Russian deaths before Pokrovsk falls. And if Ukraine is to be believed, that fall may not be as close as Russia claims. Pokrovsk won't break just yet, Ukraine says as it shuts down the Kremlin's encirclement propaganda. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to the Frontline Alert for more coverage of the Pokrovsk situation and Russia's colossal casualty count.